And we are live. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Ronnie Harris of the Limitless channel, live streaming on the Awake Souls channel with Jason Laufenberg, and we're super excited to go over Reigning Over the All with guest Robert Ferrell of Apocryphile1970, and we are excited. How you doing, brothers?
Well, I'm doing all right. How you guys doing?
I'm doing great too, and excited to have you here again, Robert. It's always a pleasure, and
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
and we're gonna be jumping back to sort of where you left off. And I know that you have like something sort of like outlined in your head. Nothing's things to cover, and I guess we're probably gonna keep this hangout under 2 hours for people. It's a lot of great content. I recommend everybody go back and check out the last time Robert was here with us, because, well, this is just part 2 of it. It's a continuation. So looking forward to it, Robert. Tell us what's going on.
Well, I mean, what I wanted to do today, I know we had a text that we were working off of, and I think I'm going to continue working, kind of toggling back and forth between those two texts. But the one I was going to bring in today was a sort of an annotated text. The idea here is that from the start, the Gospel of Thomas sort of presents itself as a book of riddles, if you will, a book of mysteries, a book of things to solve. I mean, that's one of the very first things it says, is that whoever comes to find the interpretation of these sayings will not taste of death. And we started, with that, meaning that the tasting of death, metaphorically speaking, therefore, as a logical interpretation, if you will, of that, is that the tasting of death figuratively means not knowing the mystery. And so that knowing the mystery becomes, becoming alive as a consequence. And so that's kind of your first step, is applying that particular paradigm to the entire gospel, because it's supposed to be kind of a decoder ring, if you will, something that if you work out the answers, that you will come to overcome the world. We talked about last time about how precisely that works, how exactly that actually is what it says it is. Because if there actually is an actual interpretation of this gospel that allows you to unlock the meaning of the scriptures, then unlocking the meaning of those scriptures gives you the keys, if you will, to undo a lot of the misinformation and sort of the deceptions, if you will, the blindness, if you will, the fog, if you will, of the last 2,000 years, where we didn't have the answer, and this book wasn't in our presence, and we didn't have the keys, in other words, to unlock all of these other things. And so the idea here is that this book is important because, number one, it is what it says it is. It does what it says it does. And, I'm sort of here to present just exactly why that is, so that people will come to understand it and spiritually come alive as well.
That's awesome. So I created this hangout. It was like Ronnie that had organized you coming back, and I asked him, what should the title be? And he sent this title over, How You Can Reign Over the All. And was that from you, or was that from Ronnie? Where did that title come from?
Well, I mean, it literally is kind of the way the book starts out. I mean, the promise is, if you think about it, this book makes a very bold statement, a very bold statement. I mean, when you think about it, it's just about the boldest of statements you could possibly make. If you come to understand this book, you will overcome everything. Like, you will literally overcome the world. So he's really putting it out there, as sort of a challenge, like, hey, prove me right on this, right? Because if you do,
best, right?
this power is going to be in your hands, And so what I'm saying is that that you really can demonstrate this. This is fully demonstrable. It's fully understandable, and it's very plain. And I know that when I'm talking or when I'm explaining or something, it's a little bit rambling and it's a little tangential, and that's kind of necessity. That's kind of the way the Bible works as a whole. You have to put ideas from over here together with ideas from over here to put ideas together, over here.
Well,
a lot of times it is linear, but it is also
to have
Yeah,
a correct context of everything, you need to have those details which put you in the correct context, right?
right. And so the premise of basically what I'm getting into is that the Gospel of Thomas, among other Gospels, but the Gospel of Thomas, I think in particular, because number one, in terms of it being a high-profile document among New Testament apocryphal literature, let's say it is among the most high-profile New Testament extra-canonical books in existence. You might actually say that it really is the most high-profile non-canonical gospel in existence. So if you're going to start anywhere, it kind of makes logical sense that you'll start from that. And I know the last time that we spoke, we talked about the provenance of this gospel, where it came from, how it sort of had disappeared more or less for the last 2,000 years. The modern world did not have this book until 1945, when it was found. Again, we told the story the last time about the Bedouin who found it in a place called Nag Hammadi, which is in Egypt. And basically, the figured that it being an old manuscript, wanted to make money off of it and sold it or whatever. And it became kind of a sensation because it was found among a whole collection of codices that contained the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Philip, the Gospel of Truth. So, all these years we had a very limited number of extra canonical Gospels to read and to study from. We didn't have much in the way of primary documents outside of, say, the infancy Gospels, the infancy Gospel of Thomas, the Arabic infancy Gospels, the Proto-Evangelion of James, etc. We had the Gospel of Nicodemus. We had a lot of these things that had been handed down to us that we more or less had in our possession all along in some form or fashion, or that we knew about, or that we had extensive quotes from, etc. So we had some familiarity with ancient Gospels, but when this particular trove was found in 1945, and it was subsequently translated, and it created sort of a sensation. And I think it was overshadowed a few years later by the Dead Sea Scrolls, because that was sort of immediately, like a couple of years later, I guess, is sort of superseded, and they became probably a little more well known, probably a little more, well studied. And I think in a lot of ways, it's kind of a shame, because these books, by and large, are very important, because for the most part, we don't have other versions of these books, and we don't have other copies of these books. And these, for the most part, it wasn't duplicating or replicating or supplementing anything. It was just brand new stuff that would otherwise be lost to us if not for this one event. And so serendipitously, we have this book, if you want to call it that, or you could say providentially we have this book, probably depending on whether or not it turns out to be what it says it is. And that's what kind of the impetus, I think, that's moving me today to talk about, is that this book pretty much it writes a very large check, so to speak, that it is able to cash, if you will. And so to say that you're going to be able to overcome the world, we talked about last week how or last time we talked, about the way in which just the sheer addition, if you will, of other books that you can understand and that unlock and therefore self-validate, in other words, just the very existence of such books undermines 2,000 years of Christian history by just the sheer fact that they exist and can be shown to be, if you will, inspired based on the codes, if you will, the language, if you will, the parabolic meaning, if you will, shows that these books have a certain have the same sort of interpretive, if you will, they interpret, I guess, to the same keys as do the canonical scriptures, let's say. And so the idea is that the church has its own authority and creates this thing called a canon, which basically there are different churches with different canons. So that's always been sort of a problem with Christianity, is that there is no such thing as Christianity anyway. There's Christianities, which is to say the various Catholic and Orthodox versions of Christianity: Ethiopic, Greek Orthodox, Catholic, Protestant, etc. That there have been disagreements on which books and how many. And the idea is that is that the reason that any of these canons, if you will, are believed by anyone is because it's all based on church authorities, that they've come together and they've had synods and canons, and they've had, different, if you will, meetings together where they decided what books were in and what books were out, and it was based on their own authority. Now, this is about getting you to think in an entirely different way, forgetting about the church itself as the authority. Just the sheer fact that there's different canons or whatever, to a person who's logical, that probably presents a problem anyway, because they can't all be right. So, then you have to which one, if any of them, would be the most correct, or which one of them would be correct. The idea is that this is all top down. We have councils and we have people who made these decisions, and that's all top down. But if you understand the interpretive aspects of it, then that's bottom up.
It's interesting that you're bringing that up right now, because I'm actually working on a video right now that really focuses on what took place at the First Council of Nicaea, 325.
Mm-hmm.
And that right there is like the immediate schism division, which then branched off. Like the Nicene Creed ended up being like the origin of like the Catholic Church and that whole branch. So it's I know what you're talking about, that these different councils, when they formulated a statement, and all the bishops or whatever you would call them agreed on this, that became official doctrine at those councils. So it really comes down to some detailed wording as far as things that they were arguing about, right?
Well, yeah, exactly. But one of the things that really separates, how should I say, that the one of the things that I think we have to really look at, I guess, is just what is the difference between the top down aspect and the bottom up aspect. Because what happened was, and this is what my assertion is, the mystery was always meant to be quote unquote lost and then found. There's this idea, and if you think about it, if you're going to receive revelation at a future time, it means that during the time of the interim, by definition, you are without that revelation. By definition, further clarification means that you're walking around in some level of fog, in some level of confusion, until you receive that clarification, until you receive that knowledge. Then you're on some level you're in ignorance. So what is the nature of that ignorance in which you are involved, right? If there are such things as keys, then what we call canon, and I don't like the term canon anymore, because I separate books into, in my mind, there are books that I feel I can understand, and I feel that I can explain, and I can speak to the language in it, the parabolic language. I feel I can interpret to a reasonable enough level to where I can demonstrate that this particular book unlocks to keys and unlocks to the same images and to the same, I'm saying what I can say about whoever wrote them, what I can say about whoever encoded them, was that they had knowledge of the code and they had knowledge of the keys. And what I can say about whoever laid these books out is that they had a knowledge of the pattern that would come to pass, the loss of the mystery and the restoration of the mystery. And getting back to this gospel in particular, this gospel is almost, as far as the ones I can think of, not only is it the most high profile, like I said before, it makes a very broad and sweeping statement that almost seems unbelievable on the surface. If you come to understand this book, you will reign over everything. I mean, as a statement, as far as statements go, that is about as bold as you can literally get, by saying, look, if you get this, you will overcome the world. And so, not to belabor the point too much, this is, I believe, what is before us now. This is what we have the power to do now. This is what I hope to show, at least as far as I can.
You had mentioned like a top down and a bottom up and a hierarchy.
Mm-hmm.
And I was curious because that sort of fits into your title of reigning over, because reigning infers a type of rulership, right?
Well, and then the book speaks to that. Let him who has power renounce it. You know, the idea is that there's going to be a changing, if you will, of the guard. Everything is all topsy-turvy now. Everything is all backwards now. This is about setting things right, like it speaks of in the gospel of truth. It's purely a matter of something having fallen down and easily being set back up again. The thing that I hope to demonstrate when we start looking at these actual texts, the reason why I brought my annotated version back into it was because I wanted people to be able to look at the thinking that lies behind these words. And I've annotated my own sayings. I've put them in parentheses and I've grayed them out because I kind of want to de-emphasize them. I kind of want them to just be sort of thoughts in the back of your mind. These are things that you kind of should be thinking when you're looking at the text, but that the text itself lends itself to these interpretations. And again, they're consistent. That's the thing about it. They're not only consistent within the gospel itself, within the gospel of Thomas itself, they're also consistent across the board. If you can understand them in Thomas, you can understand them in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. This particular gospel is the most like Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. It contains very little in the way of narrative structures. There are events that are spoken of. You know, you see a lamb being carried in. Okay, you can imagine yourself, you know, in that particular setting or whatever. But mostly they're sayings, and mostly they're sort of, I don't want to use the word disembodied or whatever. They're sort of just, you're not clear what the context of time and place and whatnot is. The words just speak for themselves. You know, and even Yeshua in this book, he kind of says this too, not to get ahead of myself, but just one of the things he says is that you don't understand who I am from what I say to you, right? So in other words, the inference here is that you should understand who he is by what he says to you. And basically what that entails is how he presents it to you. This book is a like I said, it's a decoder ring. It is a book of keys, if you will. And it is a book of riddles to be worked out. So I don't know if you're ready to dive into it, but
yeah, I was gonna say, yeah, I'm just looking forward to that, and just like people understanding, like, I guess Yahushua was trying to explain to them that he was the living parable of the Word, and how he was put to death and brought back is the same way that the dispensations and the way that the Word was going to be persecuted on through time. And it feels like retrospectively we are able to look back now, largely because of the body of work that you've done, and largely because of the body of the work that the apostles and the writers of the scriptures put in.
And I think that's the proper context, because what you're saying, like, for example, everything that you're saying, it was echoed, for example, before us by the prophets, and it was laid out before us by the prophets. They have done the labor, and we are entering in upon their labors. You know, they have buried the treasure, and we have uncovered it. You know, and when you think about who deserves the credit, and when you think about who deserves the honor, and you think about the people who risked their lives, who gave their lives, who saved these truths for us, and then you think about also the power of the Almighty, because again, if not for that one event, we would not have this book in its totality. If not for the serendipitous, if you will, event of this cache of books being found, you know, this mystery would have done us no good. But here at the end of time, here at the close of the age, here after the 6,000 years, according to biblical chronology anyway, here we are at the cusp of what would be chronologically the millennium, the 1,000-year period, the spiritual Sabbath, or in other words, the day is as 1,000 years, or as a day of rest, right? Where we are at rest, because there is striving and then there is rest. In other words, you look and look and look, and do not cease to look until you find. And when you find, you'll be amazed, and you will rule, and you will rest. So in other words, it's about looking, searching, seeking, striving, struggling, you know what I'm saying, to find the meaning. And then once you do, it provides you with everything that you need.
And we're all living examples of that, especially you, because you've been doing this for 25 years or longer. And now it's really starting to show the fruits of the labor, and the other people are starting to blossom as fruits as well, right?
Well, and I've been really happy with what I've seen. One of the things I sort of hope by, just sort of stepping back as much as I could was that other people would rise up and do works. And other people have been doing this to a very substantial degree. I listen to a lot of other people's readings, not just my own. There are some people out there who do some fantastic work, some fantastic readings. I've seen a few animations. I've seen a few, uh, you know, I've seen quite a bit of things actually that I feel like one of these days I'll probably dwell on that and then go over some things that I've seen that I really like. But what I really, really like is that people are catching on and that people are getting this, and that this is the entire idea, that this is really the entire purpose, is to, in the same way that I can light your candle with mine and you can go light somebody else's candle and so on and so forth. If everybody goes out and lights a few candles, everybody's candles get lit, and that's the function. Everybody is supposed to be equal. The elect are all supposed to be a brotherhood, a sisterhood, fellow sons and heirs of the kingdom, fighting as one in the battle for truth. And so the idea is that if at the end of time there are things lost and found, if there are things hidden and then revealed, covered and then uncovered, that this would be the uncovering, that this would be the revealing. And what does it reveal? If, as I've stated before in almost every video I've ever done, I've always gone over this, that the things that are laid out for the future are laid out in parabolic speech, so that we can kind of go through this 2,000 years, and the mystery of iniquity has its chance to work itself out in the theater of the world. That the work of the Almighty has a chance, if you will, to conquer evil and to undermine it. Because again, Babylon falls. There's something foundational that it's missing. There's something about it that is unsound, that is untrue, and is false. And that the cure for that is, once having found something, to regain your vision, to regain your spiritual sight, to regain your hearing, to be able to hear not just with your physical ear, physical things, but with your spiritual ear, spiritual things. You replace an ear with an ear, a physical ear with a spiritual ear. You replace an eye with an eye, a physical eye where you see physicalities, and with a spiritual eye where you see the spiritual language being spoken. And so again, demonstrating this, I guess, with the texts here. Let's see. Okay, so we were reading off of this, and I think we ended up at, what did we say? Saying 15 the last time. Let me go back and do a real quick review. This is the annotated version, which I did a few years back, and I went back today and did a little bit of show prep and tweaked it just a teeny weeny bit. But I'm probably going to work on it a little further still, and then I'm going to submit it to Rick to put up on the website, the scripturaltruth.com website. The one that I'm working off of now is available even as we speak. So if anybody wants to go to scriptural-truth.com, and you can download this and read along with us. I'll kind of do a real quick overview, so anybody who wants to do that can have time to do that. But again, it's a great resource, and like I said, Rick's a great guy for doing this. He does it on his own dime. He does it on his own time. This is his dedication. This is his work. So if you want to throw a few dollars his way, that's for his benefit. But be that as it may, it's loaded with tons of free PDFs, free MP3s. This document here. So let me just do a real quick run through of it. The narrator, which supposedly is Judas Thomas, I think it's it's just the typical voice of the narrator that you hear in any given book of the scriptures. speaking with the voice of the Holy Spirit. Then what you see here in red, those are the words of Yeshua. What I've put down, I've put down in grayed out letters in parentheses. So hopefully you can kind of read around it, but just use it for reference. Um, but in any case, the idea is that as you're reading it, this would serve as a tool to kind of to let you know what's in the back of my mind when I'm reading this stuff, or else just helpful information. But just so that you can kind of help you see just what it is that I'm talking about as I go along. Um, but like I was saying before, the first thing it says in the prologue is that that these are the mysterious sayings. So it's a sayings gospel which Jesus or Yeshua, the living one, spoke, and which Didymus Judas, who is called Thomas, wrote. And the idea here was that between the prologue and verse 1, um, they form kind of a sort of a riddle between the two. When you use the term living one here, it contrasts with death, which is in the next verse. He said, whoever hears these words and discovers their meaning will not ever taste of death. So the idea is that discovering the meaning means that you become alive, that you become living spiritually. That, in other words, you go from a spiritual death to a spiritual life. And so he spoke from the vantage point of one who was living. In other words, he spoke from that heavenly level meaning and from the spirit and from the heaven, um, the heaven, I guess, that was inside of him, and really outside of him. But the idea was that he was coming to you from the heavenly level. So the idea of life and death are permeates throughout this. Living basically means you understand, and dead basically means you don't understand. And throughout this book, you have the very same idea. You have large versus small. You have the large sheep. You have the large fish. Then you have the small fish, and then you have the 99 sheep. In other words, the contrast there is between large and small. The idea of wealth and poverty. What is the true wealth versus physical wealth? The true wealth is the spiritual wealth, in contrast with, of course, the false wealth, which is the physical wealth, and which he calls poverty. Again, it echoes what it says in the letter to the Laodiceans, where it says, you think that you are living, but you are dead. The idea is that they did not have the meaning. And when he placed before them the open door that was provided to them, the open door, he is the door, he is the scriptures, he is the word, he is the understanding, the logos, all of that is open now. So it means once the scriptures are placed before the Laodiceans, which again was the seventh in line in the churches, the seven churches, the church of the indifferent Christian, the church of the self-satisfied Christian who thinks they're alive. And so I guess the idea is that the fundamental paradigm is that even though they don't have the keys of knowledge, and even though they don't have the mystery, they're still going about as if they did, as if they knew. So they think they're alive, they think they're rich, they think that they're well dressed and everything, but they're poor and they're blind and they're miserable and naked. So the idea here is that every contrast that you see in this book, blindness versus being able to see, deafness versus being able to hear, having the one ear instead of two ears, one eye instead of two eyes. The idea is that there is kind of this duality here between life and death, wealth and poverty, um, you know, that kind of thing. So, um, can you guys hear me? Can you guys hear me? Hello, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, I'm sorry. I guess I thought I lost you there for a minute.
No, I'm sorry. I was just talking to Ronnie about he had posted some links in the chat that were just like links to his hard drive, and so I
Trying to
wasn't paying
share the link. I
attention.
was trying to share the link.
Oh, okay. So anyway, so I guess I'll get back to what I was talking about. I just thought maybe we had lost you there. But anyway, so this book basically, let me just kind of read it out to just kind of, since I've talked enough about it, let me just read it. It says, "These are the mysterious sayings which Jesus, the living one, spoke, and which Didymus Judas, who is called Thomas, wrote. And he said, whoever hears these words and discovers their meaning will not ever taste of death. The one who seeks should not leave off, but keep on seeking until he finds. When he finds, he will be troubled and he will marvel. And when he is troubled and when he marvels, he will be surprised, for he will reign over the world and reign and rule over the all. I'm sorry. And when he rules, then he will rest." Now that's a combination between the Greek fragments that we have and the Coptic fragments that were found at Nag Hammadi. But basically, all the ideas were preserved here. That the idea is that the payoff here for seeking is basically finding. That, in other words, if you keep on seeking, in other words, if you're persistent, you will find it, that it's a promise. And that, okay, so that's basically step one. You think that just finding it is enough, but when you find, the idea is that what you find is going to be troubling to you. Now, what happens when you do find is that you overcome the idea that that the churches themselves, the authority, if you will, of the church has any real validity at all. That 2,000 years, if you will, of Christian history, all of the wars and all of the battles over this heresy and that heresy and all of this stuff, it winds up basically being irrelevant because it's undercut by the direct ability to read the scriptures on the level of the spirit. So in other words, you've essentially cut out the middleman, if you will, and are united in spirit with the meaning of the words. In other words, with the logos. So when you become one with the logos, again, that's like becoming one with the Savior. That's like becoming one with our Lord. That in a sense, you and he become the same because you're on the same page, so to speak. You're coming, your eyes are seeing what his eyes see, or
Yeah,
your
well,
eyes are seeing the higher level.
if it's pure truth, like you're both gonna see the same thing. So it's always like a cleansing and a bringing up to a higher level of truth, right? Then you
Well,
see,
it is a
then you see,
cleansing. It's a transformation. It's transformative. It's, in other words, this actually literally starts out by saying, you won't ever taste of death. In other words, you will understand the living meaning of this book. All right, so it won't be dead to you anymore. And that once you find this, once you discover the mystery, and again, I put these things here for you to just kind of understand. If you seek for, what are you seeking for? You're seeking for the meaning of the words, right? Why? Because it says whoever hears these words, right, and discovers their meaning, right? So meaning and words. So the one who seeks for the meaning should not leave off but keep on seeking until it finds. So that's kind of the promise that it makes. In other words, if you do find this, you will become troubled and you will marvel and you will rule over the all. Now, ruling over the all means that everything that you've been taught, it becomes obvious to you that its entire foundation is broken. That its
It's an
entire
overstanding,
foundation is
right? Like
fine.
an overstanding.
So you become, yeah, and you become transcendent. You become transcendent because it no longer exists and it no longer has validity. In other words, if you're able to speak these things and to articulate these things, it means that the old has passed away. It means it's gone. It has no real validity because it's like anything else. The way that your mind works when you're struggling, trying to see through an illusion, like if you just had a book of illusions, let's say, and the idea was to look at it until you saw something else, something that was really there that you couldn't see before. All right. Now, when you look at that illusion, all you can see is what you couldn't see before. And it actually becomes hard for you to see what you couldn't see past. Something transforms when you see through an illusion. And what this is that it is an illusion. The idea of a canon, even though, and I will defend this, I would say that what has happened was that God has made it to where this 2,000 years was an arena, if you will, in the which Babylon would do what Babylon needed to do. Again, the mystery of iniquity would have to play itself out. That all of the higher level meanings being couched in lower level terms. In other words, the heavenly thing being couched in earthen vessels, if you will. In other words,
Well, sure. The truth had to be hidden in order to fall to this state, right?
right. And so this is the antidote. This is the anti-venom, if you will. This is the thing that takes the poison away that has been injected into the church. And that was because here's the thing: you have two ends, you have two bookends of this. If there is a revelation at the end that that matches what, in other words, if it's able to be decoded, if you will, it means it was encoded. So the thing that you decode, if it turns out, because it had to have been encoded, you have the end and the beginning are linked, right? Because when you find the beginning, then this is one of the things that Yeshua says in this as well. When you find that, they said, well, when will our end come? And he says, well, have you found the beginning that you seek for the end? Because when you find the beginning, then you will see the end. So in other words, the idea is that the revelations were couched, if you will, in earthly terms, so that earthly people would not see them and would not understand them and would not present them in their truth. And this was facilitated by the fact that this had already been done previously. The synagogue of Satan, in other words, the not the true Jews, but the false Jews, the Jewish establishment, the Pharisees, the scribes, the Sadducees, all those people in that particular Jewish institution already had a thing called the canon. They already had the whole top-down establishment. They already had the thing that blinded them before, because there were plenty of scriptures that existed before that are scripture today, and therefore were scripture then, like the book of Enoch, for example. If it's scripture today, it was scripture then. And they didn't accept it in Jewish circles, at least not the official ones. You may see that with the Essenes and various other groups, and maybe, people here and there. Certainly the people that Jude was talking to accepted the book of Enoch. You know what I'm saying? So it was true then, and it's true now, right? But what happened was it wasn't accepted in Judaism. So as before, so again. In other words, the head got chopped off, if you will, of that dragon, of that particular point in time. That had been killed, right? But then it grew back again. The idea was that we had transcended the canon before. And clearly Jude's audience, for example, to bring that up, was not beholden to any canon. They were reading the book of Enoch, and he speaks it plainly to them as if they knew it, as if they read it, as if they accepted it. And there's no question about it. He's basically saying that he's a prophet, and etc. So all the stuff that that I'm saying now, we know they were saying then. Jude was saying this book is valid. He was saying it then. So for me to say it now, how is that surprising? How does that change anything? How does that do anything other than get you back to where you once were? How does that do anything besides get you back to the beginning, where you can then see the end? Because the end will be at the beginning. Everything will be encoded to be decoded. So the beginning and the end are intrinsically linked. And that's what this book is about. And the idea is that this gives you the power to rule over them all, because they don't have an argument to stand on. And since there's no argument, and there's no, that isn't to say that they won't argue. Don't get me wrong. People can argue things all day long, but it doesn't, they will argue in vain. They will argue from the point of view of someone who's wanting to hold on to power, who's wanting to hold on to establishment, who's wanting to hold on to the past for whatever reason, right? To this age. And that false teaching is linked to this age. So the only way to transcend the false teachings of this age is to find the true teaching that was from the beginning. And by decoding it, you automatically know what was encoded. And so the entire age disappears. And then you come to rest because you are no longer struggling to find the truth, right? Discovering their meaning, in other words, gives you that living spirit or whatever, and it gives you the ability to overcome. And then it gives you the ability to rest. You achieve the rest because you achieve the certainty, where
That's a
you no longer
spiritual
have
rest,
to.
right?
Well, it is. In other words, you're not struggling anymore. Like if you don't know something, like any kind of work, if you're not there yet, if you're not if you're whatever you're talking about, whatever endeavor, if you're building something, once it's built, then it's done. I mean, yeah, sure, you can see maintenance or whatever, but it's like it's once you get it, you get it. You go from death directly to life. You go from the physical to the spiritual. You go from the fog, if you will, of this interim period where everything is couched in earthly terms to someone who can see. And so again, not to belabor the point, but that's your basic starting point. Now then it talks about the authorities. It brings them into the fray. He says, look, should those who lure you or lead you, as one of the translations says, behold, the kingdom is up in the sky, right? In other words, not here, but there, right? Then the birds of the sky will beat you to it. So again, the birds here represent the religious leaders. And if they should tell you it is under the earth, or in other words, subject to earthly or scholarly teachings, right? And a lot of Christians are sort of nominal Christians. They don't believe in miracles. They don't believe in, the spiritual truth or whatever. Some Christians are borderline atheists, because they see things earthly. They want to go looking for earthly reasons for why the Red Sea parted, or they're looking for earthly reasons like who was Jesus really or whatever. What I'm saying, those kind of people. Everything is subject to, because you're constrained by this definition being universal. Like you don't even have to guess at it. The word automatically changed to, in the beginning there was the earthly and there was the heavenly, right? He created in the synagogue. In other words, the ones who are above you religiously, the people who outrank you, in other words, top down, right? The idea that these are talking about institutions. Then it says the fish of the sea will beat you to it. The idea that these are the various churches, if you will, of the age, right? The fish of the sea will beat you to it. In other words, they're going to come up with a whole bunch of different religions, if you will, different denominations, if you will, and they're going to lead you. In other words, these are your leaders, right? So these are your leaders in various forms. If they're the birds, if they're the fish, if they're the people who say it's under the earthly. In other words, it's either Christian, Jewish, or secular. And then they're going to beat you to it, in other words, or they will precede you. In other words, they're going to lay the groundwork for their own teachings, and you're just going to follow them blindly, right? And he's saying, but no, it's something totally different. The kingdom is within you, and it is outside of you. It is without you. In other words, you don't need the leaders. You don't need them. They're nothing. They're doing nothing but blinding you and leading you astray. Remember, the false Jews were the blind, and what they did in terms of their canon, the Christians also did, the false Christians. So those were the blind who were leading the blind who came after them, and they both fell into a pit. In other words, if you read it on the level of what that means, of course, is that pit is a hole, if you will, in the earth. If you're in the pit, if you're in the ditch or whatever, you're surrounded by the earth. In other words, they're constrained by earthly teachings, is the imagery. But those of you who know yourselves will find out that this is true. So in other words, when you come to the knowledge, and again, I feel like I can speak with some level of confidence about this because I know that this is true. That I don't feel like I'm struggling or straining to understand this anymore, because I understand the idea of what is being said here. You will find out who you are. In other words, you will find out that you are one who was destined, if you will, to be illuminated by this truth. And as such, you will become known. In other words, like I said before, you will hear with his ears. You will see with his eyes. You will work with his hands. You will go where his feet lead you. In other words, you and he become one. And you will recognize that you are sons of the living Father. Again, the living Jesus, the living Yeshua, right? What he spoke, you will speak because you have become a son and you have become alive, spiritually alive. But if you do not know yourselves, then you dwell in poverty, and you are yourselves that poverty. And again, the poverty here is not knowing yourself, not knowing your heavenly level, not knowing the heavenly you, if you will, your upper self that has been given to you. So you're stuck on the level of the flesh.
So there has to be an awareness of a person that because they know that they're at a certain level, right? It's just an awareness, a presence that a person has when they have the knowingness.
Well, again, it's pretty much what it says. If you hear what he's saying, then you've gone from death to life. When you hear the term, you place an eye with eyes, when you place an ear with an ear, right? You're thinking to yourself, again, that's why I had this stuff in parentheses or whatever, but your thinking to yourself was largely what I've got here in parentheses. You're looking for the mystery, you find the mystery. You're looking to understand it, you come to understand it. Okay, it's like seeing through an illusion, like I was saying before. There's some, if you've ever had something that was really hard to see or whatever, and you struggled against it, and all of a sudden you had that aha moment, I see it now, right? A riddle, a mystery, any kind of thing where you have that immediate sort of insight or whatever. You just know in yourself because it becomes obvious to you.
One of the things that I've been talking about for years is that the power that's within lies, right? So a lie is built on something that's a non-reality. It's a non-truth. It doesn't have an actuality to it, right? It's just like a falsified existence. So it's only the person that is deceived by the lie that gives any power to the lie. All right, because as soon as a person knows the truth that it's a non-reality, there's no existence to it.
Well, and that's why the Shepherd of Hermas talks about the devil being in a weak position, that he has no power, because his only power is non-existent. He's got you thinking about things that aren't.
Right.
And so when you read that, and it's like, no, and the angel argues with him. He's like, no, he has no power, none.
Right.
The idea is that, no, you're making him 10 feet tall, and he's not. It's like he's filled with dead men's bones, I think, or was what he's saying. He's weak and powerless and afraid. And that's the thing. He's afraid that people will know this. And I wouldn't blame him, because that's his last vestige, period. He went from warring in heaven to being trampled under by the feet of men.
Yeah, and then all of a sudden he becomes the emperor with no clothes on. Like, boom, They're just exposed.
But again, just to kind of recap, the entire book, as you're reading it, is just riffing off of those same ideas. But there's a riddle kind of in each and every one of these logians or sayings, as they're called, that gives you a little piece of the puzzle. And again, all of these things you take to the Gospels, and then you take the keys from the Gospels and you bring them into Thomas. The idea is that if they work interchangeably, what happens is you understand these books rather than accepting them or not accepting them. That becomes because accepting something and understanding something are kind of two different things. I mean, there's some similarities here. If somebody wants to work out, some calculus problem or something, and they have some ability to work out calculus and they work it in front of me, if I don't understand it, I just got to take their word for it.
But yeah, it's even like saying, I know Spanish is a language, but until you can actually speak it and understand it, it's really no value to you.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I want people to see this. So that's again why I'm trying to make this resource available to people. Like I said, it already is available to people. I just want to call people's attention to it. I may update it in the near future. I don't know. But largely, I haven't had to go back on anything I said. This is something I wrote back in 2012. You know what I'm saying? So this document here that I'm looking at here is something that's been available for a long time. It's just what it is. I don't know why people don't get it or why it hasn't caught fire yet. I'm not entirely sure. Although one of the videos that I have is actually one of my highest viewed videos with this. So I guess people are passing it around.
Yeah,
I
we've
just want
shared
to
it.
reiterate the fact that, this is, I'm sorry, go ahead.
We shared it too years ago. Try to as much as we can, and I know there's probably people that we haven't even found yet that also are sharing it, right?
Yeah, no, it's kind of like training wheels. I just want people to be able to kind of see what I'm showing here. A day is as 1,000 years. What do they mean by 7 days? Well, if a day is as 1,000 years and 1,000 years are as a day, that corresponds to the seventh millennium in the spiritual sense. So you can look at the eyes of the flesh and see 7 physical days, or you can look with the eyes of the spirit and see 7 millennia. You see what I'm saying? In other words, you're taking the variable. It's a little bit algebraic. Like when the disciples asked Yeshua about the meaning of the parable of the sower, for example, and he used terms interchangeably. The sower is the son of man. The field is the world. So it's kind of like variables. It's kind of like X and Y. A plus B equals C or something. The idea is that behind these terms there is some mystery, there is some meaning there. But it works itself out sort of algebraically, and that's what you got to see. Knowing the keys helps you to fill in the blanks, helps you to form sort of that algebraic equation where if A then B then C equals this based on that. And then that might give you some further insight. So it's just a matter of seeing more and more and more and having aha moment after aha moment after aha moment and getting it, and your eyes being open and your ears being open, and again, he becomes you in the sense that you see with his eyes. Like even Paul talked about that. We have the mind of Christ. In other words, even his thinking is your thinking, you know, uh, and so the distance between you and he becomes really non-existent. You're no longer in rebellion, you're in submission. But that submission isn't servile. You get to reign, you get to rule, because that's exactly what this does. Because he wants to take Babylon and destroy it at our hands.
Well, the
Because that's
scripture,
really his doing. Our doing is his doing.
and
We are his work.
a lot of people don't really understand how Yahushai said, like, those who come after me will do even greater things than I, right? And that's an awfully large statement for him to say.
And that's also in the Gospel of Thomas here. If we ever get to that point in the text here, but for what it's worth, the reason why you can is because the work has been done. It's like if you walked into a field that someone else had tended and someone else had planted, and there was grapes and olives and whatever there just for you to pick. That's great. You're a harvester, but you've entered in on other people's labors, and but again, you're called last, if you will, but you're paid the same. In fact, you're really paid more because you're given the luxury of having most of the day off. You're put at the end times when the fruit is ripe, so that you can pick it, so that you can bring it in. Because again, another analogy, you're the ones at the ends of the street. The invitation was rejected, and the invitation has always been rejected. That's the thing. All of these books have existed. A large number of these books have existed with us almost the whole time. If you go back and you read any of the works of the apostolic fathers, like I mentioned before, the Proto-Evangelion, all of that stuff, a lot of that stuff's been with us all along. The Apocrypha, whatever, the standard Apocrypha, whatever, that's been with us all along, in some form or fashion. We've just always rejected God's word to a certain extent. The church has always sort of rejected these scriptures because the canon was imposed. And so the object became not to understand these books, but to ignore them and to marginalize them and to detract from them. And I've listened to a lot of people talk about why you shouldn't read the Apocrypha, why you shouldn't, believe it or whatever. And most of the answers that they have are either somewhat specious, rely on a very strictly fleshly understanding, jump to conclusions that really aren't there or aren't inherent in the argument, and a lot of which are double standards. Like you'll say, well, we don't accept this book because of reason X, Y, and Z, and here's this canonical book, and it's the same standard applied to it. You wouldn't have that book either. You know what I'm saying? And so people have this sort of schizophrenic view of these books that they're sort of quasi holy, but you really shouldn't read them. Or you should avoid. You know what I'm saying? So the idea is that these books have always sort of been considered academic, but a large number of these books we've had. This book is kind of unique, as are a lot of books that are lost and then found, and a lot of them have been. I mean, the Gospel of the Savior, the Nag Hammadi Codices, the Dead Sea Scrolls. A lot of these things are coming back to us after a huge long hiatus, and again, there's this feeding frenzy right at first, but then they become academic. The idea is that the preachers haven't preached from these books. They haven't defended these books. They really haven't given these books a fair shake. It's like they start out with a presumption. We have these 66 books, or we have these 70 odd, 80 odd books, or whatever your particular denomination accepts. And that's fixed. And so we have to treat these books inside this way. And we got to treat these other books outside of this some other way. But when you come to see direct, in other words, you're not following the leaders who are saying it's, over here, and you're not following the leaders saying that it's over there, right? But when you recognize it, when you come to actually see it, and that illusion is gone, like I said before, you cut out the middleman and you're seeing it direct. And so that leads right into the next statement. Actually, he's like, look, know what is before your face, and what is concealed from you will be revealed to you. For nothing is hidden that will not be revealed, nor is anything buried that will not be raised. So what is the connotation of being buried? The idea is that it's stuck under an earthly teaching, the fleshly level, right? It's buried. But if it's raised, in other words, and sort of by extension, dead, because you're dead and buried, raised and alive, that hidden, again, buried, the Lord was hidden, if you will, those 3 days, was buried underneath the earth for those 3 days, the Logos. But what is hidden will be revealed. What is dead will come alive. It's like we touched on the last time. Again, it's like deja vu all over again. It's the idea that these things go around and around and around and around and around on themselves, kind of saying the same thing. So when you get it, you get it. There's nothing, it's not like 4 isn't really kind of the same thing as 5, isn't really kind of the same thing as 6. All of these things relate to one another, and all of them follow the same basic pattern. Speaking of keys, you go read in the Gospel of Truth what the child was. It says the children are the elect who are to come. So when you say a small child of 7 days, it means the elect, right? And it also means those of the 7th millennium. So here we are in the 7th millennium, and we're talking about the elect, but this book was written sometime in the 1st century.
That's just amazing, right?
No, and even if so in other words, there's going to tell you about the place of life. In other words, you come alive. You won't taste of death anymore, right? You become a living one, right? You discover the meaning, right? You find, right? And then you are troubled. And then once you get over the shock, if you will, of really realizing that you realized it, if you know what I'm saying, really getting that you got it, right? Then you're surprised because, wow, I actually got it. I get it. Okay. Wow. How surprising is that? And
the light bulb goes on, right? Bang!
Throw over the establishment, and you're cool for the next 1,000 years because you live and reign with Christ.
That's an amazing
You are
promise
prince and
right
a
there.
king when you overcome, right? So all these people that are leading you astray with all of their mumbo jumbo, and it's oh here and it's oh there and it's under the earth or it's in the church or whatever, you get it. You realize that happened, and this was written down before it happened. So now you have this notion of this all powerful being who has he has the ability to call the end from the beginning. He did do that. He did do that. You get it. It's like, oh my, he did do that. You know what I'm saying? You get to that place in your spirit, and you're just secure in your knowledge, because it's like, oh, I get it. You know what I'm saying? So again, that nothing is hidden that won't be revealed, or nothing that is buried that won't be raised up. These are mysteries. The mysteries are buried. The meanings are buried. The meanings are hidden, right? Because again, for many who are first will be last, right? Why will they be last? The idea is that those who were first fell from their position of this knowledge, that somehow the church was made to succumb to this ignorance. The gospel of truth calls it the fog. They stumbled around. Those in the middle, those in the interim, those of the 2,000 years, in other words, the church age, who walked around in a fog, who were confused. Their minds were muddled, and the mystery was falling down, and it needed to just be set back up again. This is just the setting back up. These things all interrelate. And so that's why this book is so critically interesting, because it, in the first few verses, really makes the point that this is about doing what I'm telling you it's doing, and it does it. And then when you recognize that it does it, then you're like, wow, this thing is for real. And you get it. You go from somebody who's questioning things or searching for it to having found it and having understood it. And again, we talked a little bit. I don't want to go into every little thing we talked about the last time, but that's kind of the foundation on which this book is written. The idea is that it is revolutionary, that it is designed to give you the power to usurp the authority of the church, because their authority relies on and between themselves. And your authority is based on the Logos and on understanding the truth and actually being able to bring out what is hidden and reveal it. Right?
I really do believe that we are right at the cusp of these words right now.
Right. And so we talked about this last time. How do you want us to fast? Again, they're thinking of a physical fast. How are we to give alms? They're thinking of physical alms. How do we pray? In other words, how do you even know what to pray for? When the idea is that revelation is going to be lost and then found, right? The idea is that during the time when it's lost, how would you even know what specifically to pray for? I mean, you could generically say, please give me the knowledge or whatever, but for 2,000 years, were they saying, give us the keys? Give us the mysteries of the lost scriptures? You know what I'm saying? They weren't barking up that tree. They thought they had found the answer. They thought that they were on track. And so everything that they would have asked for would have been for their understanding, right? What diet shall we observe? They're talking about a physical diet, but what would be a spiritual diet? In other words, and this is another one of those interesting keys. You just parenthetically put spiritual in front of everything. A physical fast versus a spiritual fast, physical alms versus spiritual alms, reciting prayers like from a prayer book or doing something ritually versus praying in the spirit, let's say. What diet, what spiritual food should we eat? That's the canon, right? And Jesus answers them very obliquely. He says, do not tell lies. Well, that seems a little bit out of the blue. Wait a minute. How is that answering this question of fasting and giving alms and praying and stuff? How does that even answer that question, right? Do not tell lies. Well, because again, in order for the mystery to be subverted, it had to lose out to a lie. For the truth to be lost, it had to lose out to a lie.
Well,
right?
Yeah,
The
whole topic of lies. I mean, like I was saying earlier, they're built on non-realities, and so like specifically instructed. In fact, it's the fall of mankind. It was over lies. Like, just don't let things that are not true come out of our mouth. It's really
Well,
important.
but also the thing is that the lies held sway for 2,000 years, right? If you take it in the context of history, or do what you hate, for all things are plain in the sight of heaven. So what do you mean by the sight of heaven? From the heavenly level understanding. And all things are disclosed before truth. Again, history is disclosed before this understanding. The mystery was lost and then found again. It was um, enclosed, if you will, in terms of the dress, if you will, the garb of earthly terms, in order to be disclosed in terms of the unlocking, if you will, of these keys, the seeing of them. Because again, because nothing is hidden that will not be made manifest. So he's really picking up where verse 5 left off, where nothing is hidden. So these guys are trying to change the subject, and he's bringing them back. He's like saying, look, there's nothing hidden. And I put parenthetically, like the keys, that will not be made manifest, and nothing has been covered up, again, by nefarious people who want to cover up the truth. You know, why do you want to cover up something that opens people's eyes? Because you want them blind, because you want them enslaved, you want them as your chattel, you want them in chains, you want them as a resource. You know, people did that, and they still do that, and they always will do that. That's why they have to be removed, because they're not compatible with people who search for truth, and they could not be happy in heaven. They could not be happy under the heavenly.
And as
Um,
long as they're willing to introduce lies for whatever gain it is that they're trying to, they'll continually corrupt things. And so,
well, but
like
he's
you said,
putting it
they're
on him. Yeah, do not tell lies, because other people will, and he's warning them against it. No, don't do it yourself. Um, I'm sorry. Go ahead. You were saying?
no, that's fine. Keep going.
Okay. So then he goes on. Um, and again, you sort of struggle, like, how does this relate to that? I don't see these things as random. I see them as being kind of in order, in a sensible order. When he says, "Blessed is the lion that becomes a man when consumed by man, and cursed is the man whom the lion consumes, and the lion becomes man." All right, he's talking about. Well, it's interesting how in English this works. The lions are liars. The idea is that the lion is Satan. First Peter 5:8 says that Satan walks around like a lion, roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. Right. So this is a lion devouring man, same as in Second Peter. So you know that the lion, is Satan, right? Because that's the false one. And when you conquer the lion, if you will, when you conquer Satan, right, then you are blessed, because now that lion, if you will, the lion that's been taking place becomes man. In other words, the idea is that you've taken all that and turned it around. You've turned it on its head. You've gone from the top down to the bottom up. You've eaten the lion. You've eaten Christianity. You've destroyed it all, right? And then he goes on to tell a parable. The kingdom is like a wise fisherman who cast his net into the sea. Again, we talked about that being the Christian era, and drew it up from the sea, right? That is to say, the Christian age. So there's a passage of time. You're throwing it in, you're pulling it out. That's the age, right? Full of small fish, right? Again, how many different denominations are there? Lots of them, right? So it's full, right? And are they any of them really predominant against the other? They're all kind of small, right? Well, when you find the true one, right, it says, among them, the wise fisherman found a fine, large fish. So fine and large are associated with another, right? Large is a key that has to do with fine. A singular teaching, in other words. It's a singular Christianity. This is one thing. This is the mystery lost and the mystery found. This is the keys lost, the keys restored. But again, you end up with this stuff. You started out with this stuff. If it was decoded, it was encoded. If it was found, then it was lost. right? By people who lied, by people who gave in to Lucifer, who gave in to the lion, right? And they chose to find the large fish, right? Which I actually should have put in gray, but the idea was that it was the large fish, which was fine, right? So that bears on this: a fine large fish. They chose the large fish, the fine fish, in other words, without difficulty. Whoever has ears to hear, in other words, a spiritual ear and a physical ear, let him hear, right? So in other words, it's permissible for you to know this, right? The upper, in other words, you have ears, plural, in other words, so you hear the upper and the lower. And he says another one. Now the sower went out, took a handful of seeds and scattered them. Some of them fell on the road. And again, the road is the thing that you walk on, like a tradition. It's like the walk that everybody walks. It's like the path that everybody takes, the road. And it, again, it gets trodden pretty hard and becomes, a place where seed isn't going to grow, right? Some of them fell on the road. And the birds, again, we see the birds again. They came and gathered them up. Well, specifically, that refers to the powers that be, the leaders, right? If your leaders say to you, so those who lead you should say to you, behold, the kingdom is up in the sky, then the birds of the sky will beat you to it. And what do the birds of the sky do? They take away your food. They take away the harvest, right? They gather them up, right? Because again, the seed is the word of God, right? So others fell upon the rock. And anyway, when you shoot, like this is interesting too. You got to kind of see this as a progression. If in all of the gospels, it's very interesting how this particular parable is linear. It starts with the road, right? Then it goes through the ditch, then it goes through the rocks, and then it gets to the soil. The idea is that from the road, which is tradition, the seed can't grow because this is outside of tradition. The idea that there are all these outside books outside of the canon it runs against tradition. It runs against the road. So, what I'm saying? It's not what everybody believes. It's not the path that everybody takes, in other words, right? So there's no way the birds will come and take those seeds up, and the seeds of the word of God. So what are those? Those are the books that are being removed. So this is the first stage of our decline in order. And then because they took away those words or whatever, the idea was they took power away from the word and put it in themselves. We are the ones who say, we're telling you where the kingdom of heaven it is. It's here, it's there. We're the power, we're the authority. And then they get rich because they're fleecing the flock. So they become wealthy. So that's the ditch. That's right next to the road is where you would find the ditch, right? That's the next stage. That's linear, right? And so seed sown there is sown where all the weeds are, right? The wheat and the tares, the weeds, and it's choked out because they're thinking about money and they're thinking about power and they're thinking about controlling you and et cetera, et cetera. That's the next stage down. And then the church becomes established. Upon this rock I will build my church. And again, they didn't take root in the soil, and they did not produce ears because, again, it was not able to take root in the church. Because, again, what good was the word in the church when the word that was valid had already been gathered up? They were minus the Gospel of Thomas. They were lacking Second Esdras. They were lacking the Book of Enoch. Those were all gathered up, right? Others fell on thorns, right? Well, and anyways, they choked the seed and worms ate them. And the idea here is that the worms would be this is unique to Thomas, actually. I put on here, this is what I think it is.
I want to talk to you about that. I wanted to stop here and really focus on, you added the word the Protestants, and I've really just learned about the Protestants as I've been working on this video now, having to do with the Council of Nicaea 325, really what that was all about. And if you follow the events that came out of that, that fight that took place then, it happened again with the Protestant Reformation, or whatever you want to call it. And it's interesting that you have those words there.
Well, but again, what do you see as the eating of the seeds, right? Eating them. They ate them, right? So this is a removal of the seed is what? The word of God. So this is a consumption of them. So some when the Apocrypha got taken out, what was even left of it was taken out. That's a further consumption of the word of God. That happened when the Protestants got rid of the Apocrypha, in my opinion. You could take it with a grain of salt, but that's how I work this out. The idea here, though, is that that at the very first, the birds, who were the leaders again, gathered certain books up. Those are the books that never even made it, never even had a chance, because of the road, because of traditions. In other words, they had to stick to the tradition of what was like. In other words, the church conformed itself to the Jewish tradition, right? So in other words, they came in imitation of that. In other words, the Jewish canon became our Old Testament, basically, except for the few that represent kind of the difference between the Catholic and Orthodox. There are variations in the canon, but by and large, they didn't take Enoch, they didn't take Second Ezra. There were a lot of books that didn't get accepted really by anybody.
So can it be said that it was the Protestants that actually were active in that censorship of those books? Is that why you?
There were a lot of motivations for that. I think the purists, the ones with the quote unquote best intentions, the most well intentioned of them, probably thought that these books were of some inferior quality, that they were not as well attested to. Some of them weren't even in Hebrew, but in Greek and etc. And they found all kinds of ways in which they said, there are reasons why these books shouldn't be on the same level as these other ones. And eventually that became kind of a crusade to, I mean, the first thing that they did was they reduced the size of these things, these books, and they put them, I guess, at the end or between the Testaments or something. They separated them out from among the Old and the New Testament. So they basically de facto decanonized them by de-emphasizing them. They weren't taught in church. And if you're reading something that's half the size of the other ones, you know that it's not as important. So, they sort of had generations of people sort of, they sort of weaned them off of it, I guess. You know what I'm saying? Before they officially took them out, because that was kind of a big thing. You don't just take books out of the Bible, but if you present like as if you're doing something right, or as if you're doing something good, or as if you're doing something for the right reasons or whatever, then you can get away with it. It's like a lot of things, like people do that today, like with various kinds of propaganda. They try to hide behind something that sounds good.
Yeah.
It really is evil.
As they take away your freedoms, they do it through, this is to keep you safe and secure, right?
Yeah, it's the same idea. Oh, we want to make sure that we have only the purest, holy, you know what I'm saying? and that was the idea. But the idea was that I feel like in this case you had two diminutions of the word. Once where they got once where they were gathered up, right? Those were the books that didn't make it in the first place, and then those that got eaten up later. And so that's why I feel like this is a cryptic reference to the Protestants who removed those books. And then after them, others fell on good soil and produced good fruit. And it bore 60 per measure and 120 per measure, which I've worked out here, because the idea is that in this particular gospel, I think it's interesting. The idea is that 60, the idea is the number 6 being the operative term, that after 6,000 years or whatever, that represents man's understanding up into that point. So the first 6,000 years, I believe, is symbolized by the number 60 here. And that the reason why it's 120 per measure for some is because they took the knowledge of the 6,000 years, which is represented by the 60 there, and doubled it by going from the physical understanding to the spiritual understanding. Like it says in the Gospel of Philip, the Holy Spirit is a double name. You know what I'm saying? So the idea is that you doubled it by going from one ear to two, by going from one eye to two eyes, like that, from going to, from seeing on the carnal level to seeing on the spiritual level, hearing on the carnal level to hearing on the spiritual level. And then he further kind of refines this idea by saying, I have cast fire upon the world, and see, I'm guarding it until it blazes. Well, if you understand what I'm saying, you see how he's guarding it until it blazes. It's going to blaze up, it's going to be destroyed. And not only is it going to be destroyed, it's going to be destroyed by something that replaces it with something better, actually something perfect, the perfect will of the Almighty, right? And then, so going with the idea of the birds of heaven, the people who are above you, in other words, the people who rule over you, the prince of the power of the air, in other words, right? Because he's talking in figurative terms about the different levels. And the one above it will pass away, speaking of his time, which was the beginning of the Christian age, and the time before it, or the jurisdiction which preceded it, which helped to shape it from the top down. Because remember, it shaped the understanding below it by contributing the idea of the canon and just which ones of those books form the canon. And that was what was followed. That was the pattern. So you have two levels, if you will, two layers of top downs above you. The Christians are beholden to the Jews on some level. So when those two limitations pass away, right, then you can, you know what I'm saying, you have nothing above you. It's you direct with him. And the dead are not alive. Who are the dead? Well, again, whoever comes to understand the words here will never taste of death. So the idea is that that you've gone from death to life. So again, so the dead are not alive, and you can see that because they don't have the keys. They don't have the spiritual life to impart that to you. They can't contribute anything but death. They can't even save themselves, right? And the living will not die because, like I said, you can't unsee what you have seen. Once you've seen the mystery, you get it. You're good. So you won't die. You won't be reduced to being spiritually dead, right? And then he reminds them, in the days when you consumed what is dead, what he means is those who follow the canon. And in the days when you consumed what is dead, in other words, the scriptures not knowing the higher level meaning, knowing only the superficial level. In other words, they're in a dead state. They're reading the dead letter. I mean, we use these terms kind of already, so the idea is this isn't such a great leap. It's just a great insight. And you made it what is alive. How? Because, for example, there were three revelations. There was that of the Old Testament, the New Testament, and then the one at the end, right? And the idea was that when you have all these prophecies of the coming of the Messiah spoken of in Genesis, you see it in Isaiah, you see it all over the place. All these prophecies from the Psalms and the prophets and all that, speaking of the Son of Man, the Son of God, the suffering servant. When you see that imagery, when you see those prophecies, he will be called Emmanuel. All of that stuff, right? So when you see him in the flesh, if you will, when you see him coming into the world during his time and during his age, right? Then all of those words that were dead before, all of a sudden they become alive because you now understand that those were about him. And so, in other words, you've taken what was dead and you made it alive, right? So now you've come to dwell, figuratively speaking, in the light. Because again, knowing is light, it's life, it's wealth, etc. All of the stuff that's positive, right? And it says, when you come to dwell in the light, what will you do? On the day, again, a day is as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years are as a day. When you were one, you became two. But when you become two, what will you do? Right? So the idea here is that the idea of the unitary thought, even like it speaks of in the Gospel of Truth. It talks about the unitary thought. It's what I'm saying here. It's like you can take from Thomas and you can take it over to Matthew. You could take it over to Revelation. You could take it here. You could take it there. It's universal. So you have this unitary thought and you become one with this notion that it isn't from the top down. Again, it's from the bottom up. It's again understanding with your spiritual eyes and understanding with your spiritual ears. You don't have to ask your neighbor or your friend, what does this mean? Because like it says, in the scriptures, that you will know what it means. Nobody will have to tell you. Everybody's going to see with the same eyes. Everybody's going to see with the same spirit. So there was a time when this happened. So that was when we had the unitary thought. That's when things were encoded. That's when and this is why they had to kill Christians. Why do you think it was such a priority to kill people just because of their religion? It became a priority because these people were trying to subvert it, and in order to subvert them, you had to kill people. You had to do it. You couldn't have people going around speaking the truth. Anyone that you knew that knew the truth had to die, and the truth had to die with them. And that's what happened. And so the church lost its way and became divided again. They didn't have a unitary thought. They had these books were in, those books were out. This is right, that is wrong, right? So they're divided. And then what are you going to do? You're going to be lost. You're going to be all tied up and messed up, and you won't know your way, right? And so, in other words, they're looking at in terms of, oh, well, where do we turn then? Because now we're divided. So they ask this question: we know that you are going to depart from us. Who will be our leader? And he says to them, wherever you are to go to James the righteous, for whose sake heaven and earth came into being. Now, again, starting with what does he mean by heaven and earth coming into being? Well, because you understand the heavenly level and you understand the earthly level. So he's saying that James the righteous, first of all, as a leader, understands the heavenly and the earthly. He gets it. In the beginning was the heavens, and God created the heavens and the earth. In the beginning, God created the heavenly level and the earthly level. In other words, you read it all as a parable from that point in, because you're constrained to by the fact that the keys are the keys are the keys, and they mean what they mean, and you apply them with a unitary thought across the scriptures. And so you're one and not two. You're singular and not divided. And so the idea was that this particular disciple, his brother after the flesh, in other words, just as Jude was James's brother, and by extension, Yeshua's brother, someone who knew him intimately. And it makes sense because you're somebody who grew up with him, who knows his teaching. And so he basically becomes a second self, in other words, to him in some regards, in the early church era. And I believe also that spiritually he represents the Jews in Judaism as well, as does James of Zebedee. But that's kind of an aside. But the idea is that that knowing the heavenly and the earthly makes you qualified to be the leader. So he was qualified to lead based on his knowledge of the heavenly and the earthly. And so he challenges them at this point to their understanding. So now it's kind of like, okay, so we understand about James, he gets it, right? And he asks his disciples there at large, compare me to someone and tell me who I am like. And Simon Peter, who represents the church, again, because he says, who do people say that I am? And Simon, says, well, thou art the Christ, the Son of the living Father. Meaning, when you understand what living means, right? So he hit the right answer, because he was a child of that which was living. In other words, he took what was dead, which was the dead letter, and made it alive. He understood how he was the son of the living Father, right? And so he says, well, blessed art thou, Simon Bar-Jonah, because flesh and blood hasn't revealed this to you, compares flesh and blood, but my Father which is in heaven. So he's contrasting flesh and blood level with the spiritual level, or that which is revealed by the Father. So Simon Peter, it says, and I therefore say that thou art a rock, and upon this rock I will build my church. So the idea is that Simon Peter is associated with the church based on that understanding. And so he compares him to a righteous angel, right? Which is the idea, because Christians in general, they think of him in terms of his angelic nature, in terms of his power. I mean, after all, he became whiter than any, his clothes became whiter than any fuller could white them. He shone so bright, he lit up the place, like an angel would. The idea is that they see him as something divine, right? And then Matthew, who was a tax collector, and they were all Jews, of course. But the idea is that he regards him as a wise philosopher, in the same sense, in the same way that rabbis acknowledged him as a teacher. They would even come up to him and be like, they called him rabbi straight out. The idea is they saw him as a wisdom figure, someone who recognized wisdom. And Thomas, who I contend represents the elect, he's the third one here. And he says, Master, my mouth is wholly incapable of saying whom you are like, right? Because the idea is not only just the sheer difficulty of it, not just the sheer difficulty of explaining it. Like, they've given us the tools so that we can explain it. Like, it's explicable based on what we have. But also the difficulty in terms of backlash. And in terms of like trying to actually say it. Because again, and that'll become clear here in a minute. He says, "Oh, I am not your master." All right. In other words, because you have imbibed or because you have drunk, you have become intoxicated by the bubbling spring which he has measured out. So again, what does this mean? Well, the spring is water, right? The water of the word. Where does the spring come from? Comes out of the earth, right? So in other words, there's something comes gushing out of the earth. The water comes gushing out of the earth, and earthly, in other words, because you have drunk from this water that I have provided you with, I guess. In other words, the scriptures, which he has measured out. Because again, he's done everything by weight and by measures, and he's taken a great deal of deliberation as to just exactly what to say and when to say it and how to present it, which is what he's doing by having these books basically around the entire Christian age, and especially here towards the end, and having all these people who were invited. The Jews were invited, they didn't want to come. The early church was invited, they didn't want to come. The middle of the church didn't want to come. Protestants didn't want to come. You know what I'm saying? And here at the Church of the Laodiceans at the end of the age, you know, you could probably bet your top, middle, and bottom dollars that most of them aren't going to want to come either. You know what I'm saying? So that being said, you know, it makes it difficult to try and communicate this. And so because he knew that he understood about the word that was measured out, again, the bubbling spring that comes out of the earth, in other words, the earthly understanding provides you with new scriptures, and therefore it's like a spring, right? And he said, and he went and he withdrew and he told them three things, right? And it doesn't explain in any great detail what those three things are, but as you read, it kind of makes sense. It says, when Thomas returned to his companions, which would have included Peter and Matthew, presumably. It doesn't, he really can't even put it into words, right? But then Yeshua told him three things, right? And then he says, if I tell you one of the three things that he told me, like which one, you would pick up stones and throw them at me, right? And a fire would come out of the stones and burn you up. So again, the stones are testaments. The idea here is that if Peter represents Christians or Christianity, and by extension, Matthew here is a stand-in for the Jews in terms of meaning, in terms of interpretation, right? And if Thomas represents the elect, the future generation, or the third generation, in other words, if he were to tell them about his stone, in other words, right, the one thing, if I were to tell you about this one thing, in other words, there's going to be another dispensation. If you were to come out and tell him that there was the first dispensation to the Jews, there was a second dispensation to the Moses, the one thing that's really going to put them over the line is that third thing. This is, if I tell you one of these things, right, you're going to pick up stones to throw them at me. In other words, you're going to take up your testaments, right, each of you, and you're going to try to assault me with what you have, right? And a fire, a judgment, a consumption will come out of the stones, their testaments, because they're going to testify against them and burn them up. In other words, because it backfires on them, because they're taking them up as offensive weapons, and they're going to be consumed by their very own testaments, or in other words, by the words that they speak.
Yeah, the backfire thing is something that Ronnie and I have noted across multiple scriptures, that when it's talking about this time period, that the way it's like the overthrown, it's a big backfire, and then all of a sudden, like, Babylon the Great has just fallen, and just like everybody's in shock because it like was so sudden, right? keeps
Well, but
backfire.
again, when you talk about the fall of Babylon, um, I think what people need to realize is that there are a lot of things that are said, such as the wealth of the wicked is laid up for the just. And things like we will be able to eat the flesh of kings and of rulers and all that. You know, the idea is that the knowledge, I guess, that was built up will still, on some level, exist. I think that the idea that Babylon falls doesn't mean we fall. We're replacing one kingdom with another. Things become clean to us. In other words, because the lie has been seen through and it has no power over us, it really doesn't pose a threat to us anymore. It really isn't as dire as it once was, because the living will not die. In other words, once you've seen through it, you're not going to fall victim to it again. He had this one last chance. Like it says in the Freerlogian, Mark has a number of different endings. And one of these endings, which may have been an ending of another gospel, I'm not sure. It might have been tacked on, but like maybe as to preserve an ending from some now lost gospel. It might have been that because the terminology is a little bit different. Like it doesn't speak of him in his name. It speaks of him as the Christ. So that's a little unlike the rest of Mark. But in that particular Logian, which is one of the longer endings of Mark, it says that Satan's time and power is over, but there are many bad things that are going to happen. And that has to do with how in the world could his time and power be over, and at the same time he still has another 2,000 years? It seems a bit paradoxical, but the idea is that because the word is static, or at least largely static, it's set in place, so that through our misunderstanding, what power he has is power that we give him through our ignorance. So, in other words, he doesn't have any real power except the power that we've given up to him. And once that mystery was lost, there was no way to get it back until that mystery was then restored. And things like this book, for example, they make it possible to restore this, because now everything it says about itself makes sense. So anyway, then he actually goes through and gives them the answer that they originally asked for. So all of this interim stuff here is kind of clarification, because they had originally asked him this question way back here in verse 6. How do you want us to fast? How shall we pray? How shall we give alms? What diet shall we observe? What canon should we follow? What should we give as a gift, spiritually? They don't know that they're asking these questions, but they are. In other words, they're asking them in the physical level. They want to do a physical fast, but Yeshua wants them to do a spiritual fast. In other words, they're going to do without the word for a while. They're going to do without the mystery for a while. They're going to be hungry for it. They're not going to have it to eat. They're going to fast spiritually, right? So that the spirit can feast in time to come. How shall we pray? Well, they don't know what to pray for, because the idea is that they would have to know if they knew what they were going to get, they wouldn't lose it to begin with. How shall we give alms? Who are we giving to what? What are we contributing? If you go and you feed somebody right then and there, how does that help people at the end of time? The spiritual alms are what they give us in time. What diet shall we observe? Again, the spiritual food that you eat are his scriptures, his word. So what diet shall we observe? That would be the canon. What words should we eat, or whatever. So then you go all the way down here to verse 14, and then he finally, after explaining all of this interim stuff, he basically gives them the answer. He says, if you fast, you will give rise to sin. Because why? Because you're only talking about a physical fast. And so if you're talking about a physical fast, that has nothing to do with the spiritual fast. You don't get it. You will give rise to sin for yourselves, because you're not thinking spiritually. And if you pray, you will be condemned. Why? Because you you don't know what I'm going to do, and so thus you don't even know what to pray for. You know what I'm saying? So that your prayers aren't going to be answered, I guess, in the way in which you expect, right? So in other words, this is kind of unilateral on my part. You don't even know what to pray for. This is something that's going to be given in time. And if you give alms, again, if you go to feed somebody or help them out in some way or other, in a temporal sense, that's not the true spiritual alms. The true spiritual alms is giving us the riches of the knowledge and the riches of the teaching. That's the true alms, for them to give those to us who are spiritually poor, so that we could take that alms and maybe buy us some spiritual food with it, or maybe buy, you know what I'm saying, buy us some spiritual wealth.
Heal the spiritually sick, right? Feed the spiritually
Yeah.
hunger.
You know, the idea is that you're going to do harm to your spirits if you're only doing it on the level of the physical. And he's saying, look, when you go into any land and walk about in the districts, again, this is across time. He's talking about sort of the apostles in a very loose sense at this point across the age. As you travel across the age, you're going to go into this village and that village. You're going to go into Rome. You're going to go into Constantinople. You're going to go into, whatever, throughout time in the age. If you see it kind of like that, that's why I put in here throughout all Christendom. If they receive you, accept what they will set before you. In other words, whatever books they eat, whatever spiritual food they consume, whatever canon they adhere to, right? It's all going to be good because it's all good. Even if it's more books or less books, the books they have are still holy. So teach them out of their books, in other words, whatever they set before you, and heal the spiritually, I put in parentheses, sick among them, right? So in other words, what goes into your mouth, in other words, the scriptures that you read aren't going to defile you. In other words, what you consume or what you feel like you're free to consume of his word, but it's that which issues from your mouth. Because what is issued from their mouths? They've been decrees. They've been all these in that particular paradigm. It's all of the teachings of the Christian age. What's come out of their mouth is based on the canon, for one thing. So everything they've spoken of has just gone around and around and around on itself, right? And that has defiled them. They've been polluted by their own ignorance, right? But is that which is issues from your mouth, all of your decrees, all of your statements throughout the age are what has defiled you, or what will defile you, in other words. But from our perspective, it's what has defiled them. So, so the idea is that they're looking at things on the physical, he's looking at things on the spiritual. They don't get it, he does. They don't know what to ask for, he knows what to give them, etc. He just knows that the whole thing is going to be lost and then found again, and they just don't have a clue.
We are running up on the 2-hour mark, and I think we got back to around the same login, so we're going to have to schedule another hangout when you can make it. But it's interesting that you ended off there, because for me, it's almost like what defiles the man is not which goeth into his mouth, but that which proceedeth out of. Because also, what proceedeth out of our mouth is what our spirit, our heart's intentions actually spring forth, right?
Well, I mean, it is, but I mean, I think in the very specific meaning, in terms of unpacking it as a parable, as a riddle, because again, in a very general sense, yeah, people say things that are unclean all the time. Everybody does. I know. It happens. I mean, you're not clean. You're a carnal person, subject to carnal desires and failings and frailties and whatnot. But in a spiritual sense, the idea of if you don't know this mystery, then no matter how well intentioned you are, and no matter how pious you are, your piety doesn't matter, because you don't know the truth. You don't know the mystery. Your generosity, your almsgiving doesn't matter as much when you don't know the mystery, because you can't do much with it. You can't pull the veil, if you will, off. You can't pull back the curtains, if you will, to see all the machinations that have been running things for the last 2,000 years, and see clearly to identify them. You know what I'm saying? And so what you're teaching, no matter how well intentioned, is always going to be imperfect. And so we're defiled by theology, which is issued from their mouth.
That's a much better definition. I was just broadly just tying it back to other scriptures that we had. I really do find this, like tonight, you brought it to a whole other level, further expounding upon the parable of the sower and the seeds, and explaining basically, it's like, yeah, I use Yahushai. Other people use the Yiddish Yeshua. Some people still use Jesus. We're against that. I know I point that out in every hangout. I just want to point that out. It's interesting how he didn't tell them everything about the parable. He only was basically giving people an understanding that he was speaking in this parabolic language. And I just think that, like, it's amazing how you're still able to go even higher and higher every time that you're going through this book. These words really do live. They come alive. They,
well, whoever has will be given more. So if you have eyes to see, you'll be given more insights. You have ears to hear, you'll be given more to hear.
And so, like, and I know there's a lot of people that truly get it, and some people that are just learning. For me, it was the scriptural-truth.com, that website that Jesus Loves. Is it 73?
723.
723. Yeah, he put it up, and I go to that website a lot. There's the MP3s. Everything that you've done basically is on that website. You can download it. You can read it. Even the Super Gospel is up. It's like, what's that? 18 hours of extra canonical mixed in with canonical, and the way that you
16 hours roughly. But yeah, for people who may not know, first of all, if you kind of want to see more of what I'm talking about here, like where like how to break down parables in narratives, right? How to see kind of what's being said, kind of read between the lines a little bit. I really recommend what's called the Guidebook for the Elect. If you find that on my YouTube channel, Apocryphile1970, it's kind of a lengthy read, but it's a series of 6 little tracts that I sort of wrote all together sort of at the same time in my life, when I was coming to these realizations. And so I would realize something, and I would just I was working on a typewriter at the time. I wasn't even on a computer, because that was how far back this was, and I was just trying to flesh it out. Does this make sense? What I'm saying? And so when it did make sense to me, oh my God, I'm really on the right track as far as something is concerned, because this just keeps giving and giving and giving, and before I wasn't getting anywhere with it. And, this insight is the thing the key that opens every door, the key that unlocks. So I really recommend the Super Gospel, because what that is, it's something like 100 different Christian sources. You've seen gospel harmonies, which is like Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Sometimes they throw in a little extra from Acts or whatever, things that might be scattered here and there, but largely they're just limited to those 4. This is like that, but plus everything that was from the Christian age, including the Gospel of Thomas. Now, I don't present it as scripture, of course, but as an illustration of the fact that these things build and build and build and build and build. And so, in the same way that people maybe sometimes disparagingly talk about composite works. They talk about the books of Moses. Some scholars anyway assert that there were at least 4 authors for that. How do they all fit together? Well, because there's a harmony there. If that should happen to have been the case, then the reason that they work is because somewhere inherent in the scriptures is this intercompatibility. And the same thing with the 4 gospels. Somebody puts together a harmony of the 4 gospels. You don't take it as scripture per se. I mean, they have to make judgments as to what to put where and how. But at the same time, it's an illustration of the vast agreement that exists between the 4 canonical gospels. This just takes it to the next logical step. The Super Gospel is a gospel harmony of something like 100 different sources. I haven't even really gone back to check on exactly how many. But I mean, it just was something I worked on off and on for like 10 years to just see if it worked. To just see if I could piece these things together, and if the thing would just grow and grow and grow. And what I found was that a theme would be brought up at one point and carried on by another book, and then carried on by another book, and then concluded by, in another book. So all of these arcs that were in there and all of these things become visible because they're all forced to work. They're all forced to come together. And so those 2 things I really recommend, even though they're very long reads. If you read them correctly, in my opinion, there's nothing that's going to give you a greater foundation in a greater sort of panorama, if you will, of things from beginning to end as far as the life and times of our Yeshua. There's
Sorry. I listen to it all the time. I'm constantly going back to it, and like every time I do, I still find stuff that sounds new, and I'm still learning myself. You've got so many years in against above us, and Jason and I are learning, and there's so many interesting things that you tie together, and let's hope that people continue down this path, because we're just sharing this. Like, we're not like the scribes and the Pharisees or the Protestants. We want everyone to come to the truth that seeketh the truth, right? We're just openly.
I want
freely.
everyone to have eyes to see and ears to hear, and a mind to think.
Amen.
That's what I think we need. We need clarity. We need moral clarity, of course, but we also just need clarity, period. The idea of being able to articulate this stuff in such a way that it becomes obvious, I think can be life-changing for some people. For the people who are meant to hear it, they will hear it. You hear this all throughout the scriptures. Whoever has ears to hear, let them hear. By all means, hear. And I would add, whoever has eyes to see, let them see. Whoever has a mind to think, think. This is about the opening up of mysteries and the opening up of treasures. And loosing your own chains, and then loosing the chains off of other people. And those people, like it says in the Descensus, figuratively speaking, that's us. The light has shone in a dark place, figuratively speaking. They help each other off, with each other's chains. And that's what this is about. It's about casting off your chains, casting off your bondage, having the scales fall off of your eyes, and seeing and hearing, and therefore being able to act and, work with your hands, your spiritual hands, and walk the spiritual path.
I like that. I never actually thought of that, working with your spiritual hands, because I've been constantly focused on my fleshly building of buildings. And now I'm like, wow, does that mean like I can do something else too?
Well, the spiritual building is more important. Like it says in the Acts of Thomas, it talks about how, Thomas was talking about, the money that he was making or whatever. He was building a mansion in heaven, and that's in effect what we do. Our works aren't necessarily what we see, but what corresponds to our works in the heavenly. What our heavenly works are, what our heavenly accomplishments are, what our heavenly wealth is, where our treasure is. If our treasure is in heaven, if our thoughts are in heaven, if our actions are in heaven, if they're on that level and they're with that intention, right, then we will be given, again, whoever has something in your hand. If you get it, you just keep getting it. And what I'm saying? And it is pretty straightforward. Like I said, we'll get past this one, but I just feel like I have to lay the foundation every single time. And this book, the way it introduces itself, most of what follows actually after this is a little bit of just kind of commentary. And like I said, a lot of it's just kind of the same thing over and over again, just in different ways. But I want people to start thinking about this in terms of that. And then again, that's why I recommend this particular resource. Because even though these things that are in the gray here, like I said, I grade them out because I don't want to overemphasize them. They're just guideposts. Think of them as footnotes. They're just helps. But I think they're useful. And so for people who are trying to make sense of this is one thing that I've done that's pretty much from beginning to end that I would say that I'm fairly confident in. That they're basically right on a fundamental level anyway. They probably could use some refinement. I mean, like I said, I produced this in 2012. I've grown a little bit since then. But I just thought maybe this would be a little more useful for people because they can download it.
Yeah, I'm putting it in the chat.
So all this other stuff you can read yourself. If you want to go to scripturaltruth.com, just read it out. You can download it. And it's all there for you pretty much from beginning to end, with my notes included.
Yeah, we love the resources. Jason could probably unmute and share some last words. We love the time that we spend together. It's, I don't know if people at home know, but like I devote, most of my evenings and free time or any time that I want to meditate, Robert's work, what you've laid down is, 90% of the time what I go to, whether it be, there's so many different, so what's your other, I know the Book of Thomas is one of your top, but you have a book as well that you constantly love talking about, which I've been going over and over. How did I lose the name?
The Gospel of Truth, maybe?
Yeah, the Gospel of Truth. Thank you.
The Gospel of Truth is well, that was a revelation to me too. And you talk about your spiritual hands and your spiritual feet or whatever. You talked about that just a minute ago. I will say this: a lot of what I do is kind of unplanned, and it's for the same reason. Pretty much every time. The idea is that you set your hand to the plow and you start doing things, and that allows the Spirit to work in you, because instead of it being you, like sometimes I'll just start talking and I'm surprised at the things that I'll say because they'll just sort of come to me. And even Yeshua talks about this. He says, look, don't even plan in advance what you're going to say. Just say it. The words are going to come to you. And that's the idea. You're sort of flying by the seat of your pants. But if you think about it, that's what the disciples did. They were confronted by a lame person, and they're like, well, I don't have, silver and gold to give to you. But, and it's just a very impulsive kind of thing where they just start spontaneously talking, and that's when they let the Spirit take over. And if you can imagine a world full of people who get closer and closer and closer to that, they become more and more spiritually developed. And I think that the more we see this, the more we do this, the more this becomes a happening. And I don't know why this can't become a happening. I mean, this day and age, somebody does anything, and the whole world finds out about it 5 minutes later, and they're talking about it for days and weeks on end. This is big news. It has to crack the surface at some point. I say that I'm a simple person. I can't do this myself. I don't have a whole lot of in the way of business acumen or whatever, and I think that's probably people need to pick up the slack. Everybody needs to do their part. People with talents need to use their talents. I mean, it's not going to be centralized. Everybody's got a little something to give, and with everybody has an abundance and everybody has a lack. And if my abundance is enough for your lack, then maybe your abundance is enough for mine. You know what I'm saying? And it feeds on itself and it grows that way. And we all need each other, and we all can help each other. And
Jason and I we've like mastered the SEO tactics, and we've gone through that, and through the censorship, we've come to understand that it's going to be the will and desire of the people who want to actually share this stuff, to learn this stuff, and to be a part of this kingdom that's being actually laid out right now before us. And all we could do is just beg people and do like you, Robert, and just pave the path, share the truth, and try to be the best people that we can be. And ultimately, it's going to be up to the other people to join us, because we're going to keep entering into it. We've found these meanings and these sayings, and we love them. It's going to be up to everyone else, right?
Well, I mean, I don't presume to know just exactly how everything is going to play out. I know it speaks of in the wisdom of Solomon that we're going to go through the world as sparks do through stubble, and anything about all the different little sparks and all the different little, I don't want to say points of light, but you know what I mean. Everybody contributes a little something, and the world gets burnt up, and Babylon falls, kind of is roughly the metaphor. And so everybody plays a little part. That's why the elect are always referred to in the plural, and even the least among them is greater than John the Baptist, because he wasn't allowed to accomplish what he really wanted to accomplish, in the same way that our Lord wasn't really, well, I mean, he accomplished what he was meant to accomplish, don't get me wrong, but his overcoming of the world came with a 2,000-year sort of pause in it.
But that's why he said, those that come after me will do greater than I. Right? He paved the way.
We've entered in upon their labors, and we've been given the resources that were denied to others.
Yeah, we have especially the advantation of the internet, the way that we can search out these books and put them together and do like a alt control search. And
yeah, we're the I don't want to say it, we're the ones that are at the ends of the streets, the nothings and the nobodies, which is fine. I'll wear that with pride. I don't care. You know, I'm proud to be a nothing and a nobody if it means I'm invited to the feast. If other people
Yeah.
didn't want to come, well,
Yeah.
so be it.
Yeah.
If other people spurned it, I'm not going to spurn it.
I was born 3 months early, and I'm like always knocking on that. Can I come into the party? I want to see what are you guys serving tonight? What's going on? I really want in, and it's funny. I often wonder, Robert, if those that have been brought to the end are not some type of a spirit that's maybe been throughout this entire process. Like, there's so much that is beyond. We can go into the realms of speculation because I only put facts with facts. When I speculate, I like to tell people I'm speculating. But sometimes I wonder if not certain people are brought back, through the birth, because I don't believe that spirits enter into this world as characters like we are without being born, right? So I am happy to say that I'm at the end.
Well,
if I haven't done the works before, that's fine. I'm just happy to be here at the end of the day.
Well, again, like it says in the Gospel of Truth, we exist as beings that don't know that we are going to come into being, but we will, due to his foreknowledge. And so I would urge people not to try too hard because it doesn't come from you exactly what I, and I'm kind of splitting hairs here, but what I'm saying is be open to being used and be open, to being wrong about certain things in order to be right about others, and don't be too proud, but at the same time stand your ground, and know who you're fighting for and understand what you're fighting, who it is that you're fighting for, and who you represent,
So,
but you were written into existence. Every single one of us who's hearing this was written into existence. We were meant to be, right? Again, like it says in the Gospel of Truth, as something that was destined to happen, as something that was going to happen. And every one of us has our claim to existence because we were put here by the Almighty, who, as we can plainly see, called the end from the beginning, planned everything out to the absolute nth, degree. Everything is written out on the tables of heaven, and we are written into it. So don't underestimate your own value, and don't underestimate your own contribution.
Amen.
But at the same time, don't get puffed up, because the idea is that any one of us who has knowledge was given knowledge, and any one of us with insight was given insight, and any one of us with gifts was given a gift. And even if you worked hard, and even if you studied hard, and even if you whatever, the fact is that the resources that we have been provided to us by others, who many of whom paid the ultimate price. A lot of people paid with their lives for what we have, and we owe it to them. We owe it to their
Amen.
memory. We owe it to their honor as people, to honor them and their sacrifice. And I believe if we do that, then we will be in the right place, and that we will be honored. But it's going to come as a result. We will be as we become. If we become humble, if we become obedient, right, then we will become powerful, because that's the way to power, is to bow down and to submit. And the way to power is through also standing up and being strong. So you just have to understand, you stand up to the devil, you resist the lion, you resist the devil, and you bend your knee, to the Christ. So I mean, it's being in that proper place, understanding your place in it.
that's fantastic. So this spiritual work that we've been talking about tonight, this manifesting through spiritual work, I want to try to demystify that to the extent that I can. We know that spiritual work is definitely done in prayer, so that's a time that we're in narrative with the Father. So prayer is fantastic. That's solely purposed, and you can be really on target. There's also meditation, where you're in your head and you're thinking more in a generalized sense, that it's not direct narrative. But if you're on these topics, that it's meditation, but a word to even simplify meditation more, because that seems like the type of practice that a person needs to like sit down or be laying down or something like that, is contemplation. So really to stay focused on where our thought process is and what it's on, and spend as much rendering time on these topics as possible. And so if you're looking into topics like this and you're not quite getting it, the time that you spend in contemplation on the topic is going to open up the channel that Robert was talking about, that all of a sudden the words or the path is given to you, but it comes into clarity, and it can be quite a rush. Intoxicating, maybe it says in the scriptures. So,
well, I mean, yeah, if you're able to drink again from the bubbling spring, that's the positive form of intoxication.
Yeah,
the spiritual level, heavenly level.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I mean, again, that was what happened to the disciples too. When they were speaking in tongues, and all that, they were being, if you will, they were being conduits for the Spirit. And again, when he says he's going to become you, in this particular gospel, that's kind of what it means, that when you lend your members, your mind, your hands, your mouth, whatever, when you lend your ears, when you meditate, you lend your mind, right? When you lend yourself to the truth, then the truth becomes you and you become it, and the distance between you diminishes. And so the goal is to be one with the Godhead, if you will. Even though that sounds like wow, that's kind of a big thing to say, but that's the intent, to become the Son of God, to become like you saw with Stephen. He literally was entering into an angelic state.
Yeah, he was the one.
When Paul saw him, to think about what a dirtbag would look at that and say, I'm going to kill you anyway.
Yeah, kill him now, right?
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But he came a long way. So there's nobody that's beyond redemption, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, Paul's the clear example.
The last and the least, that's what it means, because he took somebody who he saw with the face of an angel, who could look up into the heavens and literally see the Godhead, right? Because of why? Because he had become fully submissive and accepting of his fate. And he had become bold and submissive all at the same time. He was bold to the people of the lie. He was bold to his accusers. And he was humble before God.
He prayed for them for their forgiveness. Right? As they stoned him.
But what did that bring out in him? That brought out his angelic nature. And this is something that's touched upon quite a bit in the book of Revelation, which obviously we don't have time to go into. But the transformation of man into angel, that's part of what this is. And I feel like knowing this, seeing this, I have a sense that it's going to happen, and it's going to happen for a lot of people. And we will be transformed, and death will put on life. And I think it's going to be quite a show.
That's supernatural, brother. That's what I'm praying for. I've been praying for a long time now. I don't think there's anything else we can add that could top what you had just said. I don't know if Jason wants to comment on that before we end, but the holy, powerful transformation from death to life that is going to happen to everyone that follows the truth is going to be... It
says it over and over again. You read in the Ascension of Isaiah, our spirits will turn upward. Our natures will change. And that's that when that happens, there's no lie. There's no flesh. There's no lesser person who could stand up against it. When you see Stevens all over the place, bearing an angelic nature, you know what I'm saying? And I don't want to get too far off the field, but
wow,
that sounds awesome. Yes.
Yeah, that's where we're headed.
Yeah,
because this has been promised, and what you can see as far as the scriptures, if you can see what I'm saying, then you already know he's kept that level of his word. And he's written a lot more, and so if this has come to pass, this is the first fruits. You know what I'm saying? This is a first taste of things to come. So there is going to be an overthrow. Babylon, I think that it's a combination of it falls under its own weight and it's overthrown, but I think it's undercut is what it amounts to. The church is undercut by the loss of their canon. The church is undercut by the loss of their philosophy and their theology, and Babylon is undercut by its loss of validity, by virtue of the fact that people are becoming more and more and more awake to the machinations. And again, not to open up this particular can of worms, but the sheer satanic nature of the powers that be, and to understand the contrast between those who want to those who see God's kingdom, those who can recognize his word and are able to articulate his prophecies. They exist at the same time. And so one is pitted against the other. And so, you choose sides. Again, like it says in the Gospel of Truth, do not build up that which has been destroyed, because that is shameful. The idea is that once you see it, you're committed, to the one vision, to the unity of thought. And again, once you have that unity of thought, you go from two to being one. And then the people gain that unity of thought, and now you're of two minds. I'm saying you're all of the same mind, I guess. You're all seeing with the same eye. I'm saying? It becomes universal.
Yeah.
So it spreads.
That's amazing. I guess it's probably time for us to wrap it up. The video that I'm working on right now, there's so many times I wanted to be able to like stop and interject something, but you were on such a roll. You were doing fantastic sharing what you were sharing. But the connections, because I've been working on this video, there's so many of them. I'm looking forward to getting it out. I know Ronnie and I will be doing, breakdown hangouts and stuff regarding, really what we talked about tonight, along with the information of the video and stuff like that, because that video really takes us to the original split in the true church and then the false church. And I'm hoping that if this information really comes to light, that it could be a part of what helps take down that B system. So that should be coming out sometime this week. And thank you again, Robert, for being here. Looking forward to getting you back on as soon as we can.
Well, it's always a pleasure. Thank you, sir.
Yeah,
All
and
right.
yeah, everybody.
Go ahead, Ronnie.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that Robert made some great points. We're actually just vessels for the Holy Spirit to work through. So we don't take, I don't take any credit for any of the knowledge that I have. I just want to share it with everyone. And I'm thankful that Robert joins us. And I'm thankful for each and every one of you guys in the chat. Please leave a comment below the video. Let us know how you feel or what you wanted to interject or have any questions. And maybe when we have Robert on again next time, we'll field some questions from the chat. And just, everyone stay tuned for the new video discussing Arianism versus the Trinitarianism. Everyone take care.